The meeting's to order for Yolo County or Yolo Transportation District. Can we have a roll call, please? Or you don't? Yeah.
Denise, can you hear us?
Yes. City of West Sacramento.
Absent, but she's on her way.
Okay. City of Winters.
Here.
Yolo County.
Present.
City of Davis.
Here.
City of Woodland.
Here.
And we have quorum. Thank you.
All right, thank you. But I guess we'll go ahead and vote on and approve our agenda. Are there any changes in tonight's agenda?
No, Madam Vice Chair.
Seeing no changes, I'm looking for a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Ferris,
Second.
seconded by Joshua. Oh, I gotta get official here. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? We have an agenda. And before we continue or have a public comment, there's a lot of people in the audience and here that we would like to introduce, and I'm gonna throw it over to Autumn for introductions.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair. And just for those in the room, Director Chair Early is on her way. She'll be here in a few minutes. She asked us to go ahead and get started. There's an accident along the causeway that she's behind, so she'll be here soon. But it is my pleasure to introduce some new faces that we have tonight, including Councilmember Myra Vega, representing the City of Woodland. We're so thrilled to have her with us. Welcome, Director Vega, to the board.
Thank you. Yes.
And we also have Kelly Fong-Rivas, who will be, this is going to be Director Dulcich's last meeting representing UC Davis. And Kelly will be taking over at the next meeting. So we appreciate her being with us tonight. And then we also have Al Vallecillo, who is our alternate from the City of Winters. And appreciate Al.
And Mayor.
Oh, and Mayor, my apologies. My apologies, Mayor. Let's see, we have Lola Torney. This is her first board meeting. She is our new senior planner, and we're thrilled to have Lola, and she's going to be presenting to you tonight. And a face that you've seen before virtually, Denise Silva, who is filling in. Janine Marte, our clerk, is out sick tonight, and luckily we still have a contract with Regional Government Services. So Denise, helpfully on short notice, was able to fill in and clerk for us. So welcome back, Denise. Thank you. Did I miss anyone?
All right.
Okay, thank you.
With our agenda set, it's now time for us to take public comment from anybody online or present at the meeting on items that aren't on the agenda. When we have public comment at this time, we generally don't respond because it's not an agendized item. Don't be surprised if we don't respond. We have a 3-minute clock for public comment. Would anybody like to make public comment? All right, Mr. Michael Barnbaum.
I don't know if this is on or not.
Vice Chair Lauren, I was just gonna note that this is the opportunity for general public comment on items not on the agenda and the consent calendar.
Yes, if you'd like to make comment on the consent calendar, please do so at this time.
Oh, sure. Good evening. Michael Barnbaum, and I'm from Sacramento City and Sacramento County. And hopefully a great voice to the table, as I've been the last several months. So I wanted to say, kind of reflect back at the last meeting for a moment, because I know we had a very tense recommendation, and we came together for a common goal to deliver what I would say is for the love and protection of people. And that is reflective on rejecting and coming together in rejecting the far eastern edge of the City of Woodland and Yolo County for a transit center at the Costco location. And it was more focused in a common goal, centralized for downtown Woodland and or Yolano Donnelly housing, affordable housing, sustainable communities location. And it was As for those that were here, we had a very detailed, extensive discussion, a lot of comment, a lot of dialogue and back and forth. And we collectively voted and agreed unanimously on a final recommendation. And I want to thank everybody for that. A lot of what brings us to the table here, and one of the goals we want to look at and why we come together for the love and protection of people in this room. Many of us are commonly here because of the 42A and B. If you looked at the maps that were presented and all the logos on those maps of the jurisdictions served, it is most of our jurisdictions. I will not forget Winters, as I know Winters is not part of the 42A or B, but we need to include Winters, as I put on the table, for a proposal for service between the Davis station and the Vacaville station by way of Highway 128 and 505 serving Winters. So you have frequent connectivity with the 42A and the 42B. And Vice Chair, while you and your mayor are here tonight, wanted at least now 2 members of the Winters City Council to hear that we're not forgetting about Winters. And we're going to remember that at least draft idea, concept, route proposal that hopefully we could put through sometime later this year. And you're on our mind. We're not going to forget about you. Thank you. That's the comment for tonight, and I look forward to the transit center discussion coming under 10D in February and March of this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have other public comment? Come on up.
Alan Hirsch, a number of observations. One, we should put the public back into the public record. When last meeting, there were written comments received, and oral comments, and they were not, the content of those contents were not in the minutes at all. This is not a public record. The public is not heard in those records. So the minutes are incomplete. I think they may meet the legal standard, but if your standard is aspirational in terms of inclusive and transparency, all the public comment should be reflected in the minutes, at least a line of what the subject was. So I'm going to make a public records request for them. Second, you're talking about the Woodland Transit Center. There's no information about this decision on the buses, the 42 buses, which I wrote up here today. And I suggest if you really want public input, that should be included. And there should be notice of any hearings or whatever on that decision. So you get input from the real riders. Second, on the transit center, I know it's been 5 years. Has anyone ridden the 40A bus? 3 of us here are from Davis. Have they ever ridden the 42 bus up here and back? I would suggest that we do that. Well, thank you. I think that everyone should commit to ride that bus at least once a year and experience that transit stop, the 20-minute wait in the cold. The lights are out at this particular point of note. There's a homeless person sitting there. There's actually a homeless person living aboard the bus. I know. The bus owner was very gracious with that. There was obviously making the circle. It was kind of interesting. So those are my thoughts. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your hard work. But I think if we're going to represent the public, we should experience at least occasionally what these transit defendant riders experience on a daily basis riding the bus. I think that's really important. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it. Do we have any other public comments in the room or online?
There are no hands online.
All right, we're gonna close the public comment period and welcome our chair, Dante Early.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. No idea what I'm doing, but happy to be here.
You're at the consent calendar to introduce it.
Perfect. Let's introduce the consent calendar. All right, do I have on that a motion to approve, or do any of my colleagues want to take anything off?
Happy to approve the consent calendar.
Happy to second.
All right, perfect. Have a motion from Director Barracks and a second from Director Lauren. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, perfect. Okay, we are moving on. Thank you so much. By the way, Dr. Lauren, For your support. Next, we are going to, I appreciate that. Next, we are going to take up item 5 on our regular calendar agenda.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I will go ahead and take this item. So if you, Denise, you want to get us up to fast forward us over to agenda item 5, and I think that is, let's see what page that is in your handout. We have page numbers. We don't. Okay, but it's like the 4th page. Oh, okay, great. All right. So thank you very much. So this item is a continuation of an item that we last talked about in November. If anybody can remember what happened in 2024. I know I struggled at various moments. This is to talk about our special budget workshops. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Denise. So as you'll recall, this was a concept that emerged during our budget discussions for the current fiscal year back in May, June. It was included in the board action approving the budget, and the concept is really to have a series of workshops for the board as well as committee members, members of the public, to understand the building blocks of the YoloTD budget. So we had a preliminary proposal that was brought to the board in November and had a conversation about it then and got some feedback from you all. And then had a follow-up meeting with the new chair and vice chair in December to kind of process some of the feedback that we heard at the board meeting and revise the proposal. So if we go to the next slide, this just shares some key takeaways. So this is kind of this is sort of summarizing what we heard, what we as staff heard from the board, both at the December meeting, the November meeting, and in the subsequent conversation with the chair and vice chair. And this revised proposal really reflects this. So first is that the workshop should happen during the regularly scheduled board meetings, rather than kind of outside of those meetings to make sure that that they're well noticed and predictable, and that the public isn't surprised that something's happening at a different time. But recognizing that we have busy agendas, that means that it's going to take a longer time if we're going to do it during regular board meetings, because we have important business that needs to get done every month. So it's okay if it doesn't get all done this fiscal year, because we have some cushion in our budget. We're not on the fiscal cliff is a couple of years out. It's not imminent. So it's okay to take a bit more time, and it's okay if these meetings run longer in order to accommodate those workshops and other priority items that may exist. So that's the first major takeaway. The second is that the workshop should be designed to inform, not advocate. So this is really an opportunity for everyone to kind of have the same level setting of information. Some key things to understand is, where does the board have discretion and where does it not, based on the color of money and the funding sources. But to really understand how funds are allocated and whether that allocation is fair and equitable. And to encourage broad participation, including our Citizens Advisory Committee and our Technical Advisory Committee. And then after the workshops are over, then it's important to provide direction to staff on key issues and areas of actions that we may need to take. And that could include things like whether or not to reevaluate or formalize some of the agreements that we have, both written and unwritten, with regard to how funds are allocated here in Yolo County. Which new or expanded funding sources you'd like us to prioritize in terms of going to identify new sources of revenue, and also guidelines for when and how we can cut costs as the case may be, given funding constraints in the future. So those are that's kind of what we heard. And so based on that, if we go to the next slide, we've made some tweaks to our proposal. So the first workshop will be focused on state funding and YoloTD allocations. And this is really recognizing that TDA funding, which is our state funding, is the area I think where there's the most question and concern coming up about how it relates to the budgets of our partner agencies here in Yolo County. So we're going to focus on that, not just hearing from the experts and understanding more about that funding source, but also how it's currently allocated within the YoloTD budget. So the goals are to increase everyone's knowledge of TDA and other state funding sources, hear from experts about the current status of those programs and the future of them, clarify the roles and responsibilities of the various agencies that are involved with those state funding sources, and understand how we use TDA funds and also how our partner agencies use TDA funds for our local transportation needs. So that's the first workshop. And the proposal is for that to actually happen on April 14th, which is our regularly scheduled meeting for April. We think we can smash a bunch of content into the February and March agendas and clear the agenda for April, so that we really just have a consent calendar and are able to just focus on that workshop at that meeting. We go to the next slide. The second workshop, we're envisioning this would be kind of like fall 2025-ish, after we approve the budget for this year. That would be the one where we focus on federal sources of funding. So similar to the state funding, but instead with the federal, hearing from outside experts about current status of federal funding programs and what if anyone has a crystal ball about what this administration is going to do, what some of the thought leaders think about that. And then also similarly understanding how YoloTD allocates federal funds to different projects within the district. So that's the second workshop, again, planned for this fall. Next slide. So the third and final workshop is about a couple of different pieces. Key piece is kind of the COVID impact and the impact of how COVID has changed our funding picture, both in terms of changing ridership, but also those one-time recovery funds and what that meant and how we changed the way we do allocations in order to accommodate those one-time COVID funds and what it means that they're going away. Our future budget outlook. So we have a 5-year budget outlook that we build into our budget, but really unpacking that and unpacking some of the assumptions in that budget, both on the revenue side and on the cost side. And then looking at what are the options that we have for growing revenues? What are the potential funding sources that we have that are brand new funding sources, or what are the options for expanding existing funding sources? And then finally, what are some of the options for cutting costs? So that's what that final workshop would be about. And again, we want to try to do these as soon as possible, but we're sort of anticipating that for sure we want to get it done by spring of 2026 so that when we go into the subsequent budget cycle, all of those workshops have happened and there's an opportunity to then kind of make changes to the budget based on those conversations. So I believe that is my last slide for this item. And I'll just, actually the next slide is just the staff recommendation, just to clarify. We'd love your feedback on this revised proposal and whether or not this meets the mark. And then if you're comfortable with it, direct us to go ahead with planning the first workshop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Do we have any questions or comments from my colleagues? All right, I will open it up to public comment.
This is wonderful. This is the special sauce that we brought out on board, which you bring. So this is really great. I have some suggestions, of course, everything can be improved. One of the things we talked about very deeply was not just the money, but also numbers that measures the productivity and the output. What are we getting for the money? So we don't have that in this. That needs to be discussed. That needs to be. How are we going to measure our efficiency here in terms of coverage, in terms of riders per dollar, riders per mile, things like that. All those metrics need to be in there. Maybe there's someone we can bring in to talk about that, or to give us an input on that. So I think that's really, really important, because that tells people what they're getting for the bang for the buck and whatever. And also you can measure the efficiency of your staff, how they're doing, what are the tweaks, what are the trade-offs here. The other thing is new sources. And one of the new sources is probably, we have these new developments coming, and there's no reason why you couldn't put a lighting and landscape district type thing to help fund transit to those areas. That's one idea that you could do. That would provide some more reliable funding for these new developments. Because certainly we're trying to reduce VMT in some of these new developments. Why don't we basically have them subsidize some better bus service? They should do it, because we can't prepare for that now. Maybe there are other ideas like this. This is a higher grade, this is a higher pay grade than me, but I think those sorts of things would be really helpful. But this is a great step and it's great education. Well, the other thing I would suggest is in your packet every time, you have a list of acronyms with a decipher. And it'll grow every time, because that's really hard, and that's kind of an educational thing. Just like your goal statement, the acronym, so laymen can read it. I mean, I've been coming here. I'm the senior member in this room right now. I've been coming for 8 years to these meetings, but other people haven't probably identified the alphabet. Oh, well, Judy, Lucas is as far up. Lucas is. I'm sorry, I apologize for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have any additional public comment? Perfect, please step right up.
Thank you and welcome, Chair Early.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to, Michael Barnbaum, Sacramento City and County. I would like to focus on the page from the slide, workshop number 1, just because that's coming so close to now versus the others that are a little further out. We can have additional time to go over those in more detail at later months. On point number 2, staff mentioned to hear from outside experts about current status and future TDA and other state funding programs. So this is perhaps where I might be able to come in and recommend some experts I've worked with from over the years on things like this, and would recommend to you that Barbara von Bechtold, Sacramento Area Council of Governments, I believe is a great expert in Transportation Development Act and is the Unmet Transit Needs Coordinator for the 4-county metropolitan planning area, acting as the service planners, if you will, for Yuba, Sutter, Sacramento, and Yolo County, while the process for the regional transportation planning agencies in Placer and El Dorado County are done a little bit separately than what SACOG does for the 4 counties in that process. And Barbara would be a great expert for that. You might even want to bring in Michael Pimentel, Executive Director of the California Transit Association, to the workshop in April. And one expert that came over to this region from Solano Transportation Authority is Anthony Adams, Director of Planning at Sacramento Regional Transit District. Those 3 folks could make up a great panel of experts on transit service planning, Transportation Development Act, and where the region and the state of California could go on measures like this from 3 individuals that are just within this region. And you don't have to reach out to the folks in the entire state to make a trip out here for that. Since they're local and regional, it would make it easier for everybody to have them collaborate at this table and be a panel for you in 3 months. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right, is there any additional public comment? Any public comment online?
There are no hands.
I think it's no. Perfect. I'm gonna bring it back then I'm gonna close public comment and bring it back to my colleagues. Any additional questions or comments?
Just one,
Mhm.
quick.
Yes.
Yeah,
Very
really
fair.
appreciate the overview and the proposal. I think these all make sense. I think they're really responsive to the discussions that we had last year, of course, during the formulation of the current year budget. I think the only question I have is just around the timing. I mean, I understand it's, first of all, it's a lot of work. So, and having 3 of them over the course of, like, say, this spring would be a lot. I completely understand that. I do, I think part of the concept, I think, is to try to also help inform the upcoming sort of formulation of this upcoming budget, as opposed to the, sort of out years, probably some of both, but it just, so just curious about the, just timing, I guess, around, again, it's probably too much to do 3 over the course of this spring, but at the same time, like, having, only just doing a third one of them. I mean, this spring before the formulation of our next budget, just, sort of just trying wrestling with that a little bit, right? I mean, I think if the point is to have the board be sort of and the public as fully educated as possible in terms of the sort of all the range of issues and choices that are before us, like as it relates to building a budget, or then the coming year's budget, it just, yeah, I think you get what I'm saying. So I'm just a little bit, struggling with again, yes, we should do this. Should we only do 1 this spring, or should we try and knock a couple of these out before so it helps maximize sort of the efforts for purposes of this coming year 25-26 budget. That's all. So just, yeah, bring that, raise that up to the board.
Do we wanna?
Oh, and then one other just quick comment, which is, I think, just per the public comments, first 2 points. One, just great suggestions for some of the potential speakers, Michael Pimentel, great idea, for example, and a few others. But also as it relates to, like, the potential of this district authorizing lighting a landscape district, for example, to raise revenue for additional transit. I don't think that's statutorily allowed by this agency. I think we would either have to have legislation to allow it, or county council and also the director can tell us if that's within our purview, but I'm gonna go and guess that we're not allowed to just go do that. That's probably not allowed statutorily, so anyway, but I don't know that for sure, but just would love to hear from staff on that one. Thanks, sorry.
Yeah, that's great. Yes.
Great, no, thank you for that. So I want to respond to both. First on the, I agree with you. I don't think that that's something we could do unilaterally. One of the potential revenue sources I put in here was a countywide BMT mitigation program, which is something that we could do voluntarily with member cities that were interested. In fact, we've kind of already done sort of one-off BMT mitigation conversations with various projects. So that's something that, agencies like ours can do. And that's something we could explore as part of it. To your other point about the workshops, absolutely. So in terms of the timing and how quickly do we do them? So, our original proposal that came to you in November was to do them all this year, was to do them all this spring. But we can't do that and do them only within this board meeting timeframe, right? And so it's just that balancing act that because when we get to the long range calendar, you'll see that like February, March, packed. Those are gonna be long meetings in order to accommodate this. And so, I think that's the balance is like, we've got so much work that we need to get done, regular business, like how do we, but we're certainly open to having extra meetings and doing it, and doing them more quickly for what it's worth.
Appreciate it, thank you.
So then I would bring it back to my colleagues regarding, because I think we were in our conversations, myself and Vice Chair Lauren, we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we strike that balance between giving the information we need, because these are gonna be hefty meetings. And Lauren, I think you might have even said, you don't want folks to come here and we like usher them out real quick, because they're gonna come here. We want to make sure we have the time to really get that knowledge base and not having additional meetings. And so I was one of the ones that was asking like, hey, can we do it within this? I would be open to having additional meetings, but I would ask my colleagues, and the only thing I would add to that is the balance, at least for me, because I definitely think I was one of the ones that were like, we need these meetings, is that we won't be facing the budgetary cliff this year. And so felt that there was at least some space that we didn't have to get everything done and decided this fiscal year. And looking at next year, because we still had a little bit of room with some of the additional dollars that we were able to pull down from SACOG to fill in what we know is coming, which is a fiscal cliff. And so that was the only reason why I was, at least for me, I'll speak for myself personally, willing to say, okay, we can take it out to next fiscal year because we have some space. But I don't want to be the only one stay in that. If we want additional meetings, I will make it work. I couldn't even make tonight work. Any preferences on that?
I have a question.
Of course.
Sure. How much do these workshops build on each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first two, state and federal, are somewhat standalone in terms of the content, but then when it comes to how we sort of knit together the budget across these funding sources, they are interrelated, right? And so I do worry a bit about the gap in timing because particularly the final one, which kind of pulls it all together. It's, if it does indeed take us a full year to get there, it may be that there's some loss there at that point. Yeah.
So that's where I was going at. And I do my best to keep up with everything. And I'm as a newer primary, right? I'm going to experience knowledge loss because I'm human, I think. And I have never went to advocate for more meetings. But I think that if we could have them closer together, that at least I would, and perhaps others who might be wanting to get into this, would be able to grasp and get more of the information. Makes sense.
And
The
of course,
related
yes.
question is, Autumn, do you think there would be items in workshops that would not have occurred in this coming budget cycle that would frustrate the board and would be, if we'd known earlier, the fiscal cliff is the next year, but is it still beneficial to gather this information for this coming budget cycle, even though that's very challenging to do? Or not? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I do think that TDA is the big piece that I think where we have the most questions and concern. But but it is all connected, and how we draw down our federal funds is related to how we use TDA, right? And so it is an incomplete picture to only have the one, have really talked in depth on the one piece. So yeah, I think everyone appreciate, I will say my conversations with the TAC and Assistance Advisory Committee and board members, I think everybody should appreciate that it's happening. So, you know, I hope that that builds some amount of trust and goodwill as we go through this next, you know, budget cycle. But I think the more information that we can get out, you know, get everyone comfortable with sooner the better. So it's a real balancing act for sure.
Director Chapman?
So, thank you. But so realistically, from a staff standpoint, what can be, when you step back and look at it, could all three of those be done within this calendar year? Like when you, or like, you know, if we say, oh, we want to at least get 2 in before the budget process, I mean, that's 2 in the next 4 months, right?
I don't think we can do it within the meeting windows that we have currently, which is, you know, 1 meeting a month,
Right.
because we have 2 other items. But in
Right.
terms of if we had extra meetings, could staff do it? Yeah, I think we could.
Helpful, yeah. Cause right now, we have one that would be built into our meeting. And then maybe we just add like 1 additional meeting to take up the federal one. And then the one in fall could be where we bring the information together. And what do we think about that?
I think that would work.
I would support that.
Yeah. So then all will happen within this calendar year, 2 will happen within this fiscal year. And then the third one, the bringing it all together and the potential of what next year's budget will look like, will start in fall, quite frankly, that workshop. So what do you think?
I think that's doable from staff's perspective. It's, yes. But we would have to figure, it's just the trick is the scheduling of that meeting, right? But I think it's doable.
Well, unless you'd only have 1 that you'd have to, right, for this fiscal year, that you'd have to schedule outside of a regular meeting, so that might make it doable, quite frankly, for all of our schedules, and hopefully easier for you to actually schedule, because it would just be 1 versus 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Okay, do we need to take a vote on that? Looking at our.
Yeah, we have it on for action on the agenda, so simple direction of what we just heard here, which was the staff recommendation with the modifications that it be 2 workshops in the current fiscal year with an extra meeting being okay prior to the budget, and then a 3rd in the fall 2025.
And then before I make any additional comments, do my colleagues have any other comments, questions?
Just one quick.
Yes,
chat,
Director Burgess.
Which is, I mean, at least as far as what's in the staff or the board packet tonight, for the long range calendar, we only have February and March officially kind of, I mean, you know, sort of noticed in terms of what items are pitched out there. So, you know, I understand one of these items is the first workshop is likely to happen in April, at least per the staff recommendation tonight. But, you know, I don't really know what's on, you know, we don't what's on deck for May or June yet, right, as an example. So I mean, maybe the agendas are gonna be so packed as well that that's not an option. I'm just thinking of trying to also.
Oh, yeah, no,
make
look,
the meeting,
trust me, I asked.
you know, make the workshop happen within the board. Well, I mean, it's just.
Yes, I know it's not on here, but Autumn has like this nice Excel sheet
I'm sure
all
she does.
through,
Yeah.
and I was like, can we squeeze it in?
Yeah.
So the budget needs to be introduced by April 30th.
Mhm.
And then May is when we actually take up the first version of the budget. So if we want to do another workshop, it has to happen before then.
I mean, I don't think it has to, because you guys are, you know, we have a proposal to have 1 in April and then one in the fall and 1 next spring. I mean, why?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My understanding with the board direction was that you wanted to have it before we got into the budget. So if we were gonna do it before we start to contemplate next year's budget, it would need to be before May.
Okay.
But you're right, we could do it. Yes, we could do it after.
I just don't, I think there's just the logistics of trying to plan this an extra meeting, which I think the board seems to be in agreement, like, yes, have an extra meeting if possible. I mean, but like, you know, we haven't surveyed anybody yet, or, you know, all that kind of stuff, and just know that it's hard to add an extra meeting in. So, yeah, but I mean, and that's why I so appreciate the subcommittee with staff coming up with the idea of like, try to combine them with, you know, as part of a regular board meeting. When optimal, essentially.
Yeah. I'm looking at you, okay, and such. So the only other thing that I would ask, and it's related to workshop number 3, I think it would make sense, as we heard through public comment, that by then we will ideally have had a full-ish year-ish of new data coming in because of our new data system that I think has been implemented. I'm looking at the guy. And so it would be great to actually have some level of presentation on what are other transit agencies doing on data collection, KPIs, so that we could begin to incorporate even more of that, especially because we'll have a whole new data system. So that would be great for that third workshop is what I would advocate for. I don't know. My colleagues have any concern about that? Okay, great.
If I may.
Yes,
yeah,
please.
We do actually have that kind of built into our kind of long-range work plan for the next fiscal year to do that, because we're hoping, as I'm looking at Daniel, who's troubleshooting all the APCs, that we will have all that data operational by then. I will say the third workshop actually is already have a lot of content already,
Okay.
so it may be, and I feel like this issue, the question of KPIs and what data we want to collect could be a whole thing in and of itself. Not, and I don't want to overstate that, but I think if the board is flexible on that, we may just incorporate that as a standalone agenda item in an upcoming board meeting.
I think that'd be great.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for my colleagues. Okay, I see nodding. I'm gonna have to get used to that. Okay, all right, great. So then we do need to take action. The action on the floor is that we would adopt the staff recommendation with the modification that we would have 2 meetings this fiscal year and the third in fall of 2025. Did I get that right?
Yes.
All right, does anyone want to make a motion for that?
So moved.
Okay, perfect. Director Chapman moves. I have a second with Director Vega. Yes. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Great.
Thank you very much.
Let's move on to item 6.
And we'll welcome up YoloTD, our new senior planner.
Hello and welcome.
Good evening, everyone. As mentioned, I am YoloTD. I'm the new senior transportation planner. And I started a few months ago, so I appreciate you welcoming me here for presentation. So for this evening, we wanted to provide a very high level how transit service planning works, not necessarily because we don't think any of you know how transit service planning works, but we want to also make sure that if there are any gaps in your knowledge or the knowledge of the community who are watching this or will be watching this later, that we sort of are all on an even playing field for how transit service planning works, setting you all up for future discussions about the short range transit plan. And I'll go into that a little bit more later. So a little bit of background on me. So I went to UC Davis and graduated with a bachelor's degree in environmental policy analysis and planning, focusing on transportation, and then went down to San Jose State for my master's in urban and regional planning, also focusing on transportation, and worked in the field for a long time. And then realized, I knew nothing about transit planning at all, with both of my degrees and all the time I was working in transportation, knew absolutely nothing about transit service planning and transit capital planning until I started working for Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, or VTA, down in the South Bay. And so we realized that we as planners don't necessarily do a very good job explaining what we do. And so I worked with some former colleagues to put a version of this presentation together to sort of educate our elected officials, members of the public, our member agency staffs who are working with their communities and elected officials, to make sure that we're all on the same page again on how transit service planning works. And this evening, we also have provided a resource for you, the book, in my opinion, yes, on transit service planning, written by my personal favorite transit service planner and former practitioner. So a lot of the images that you will see tonight in the presentation were not copied directly, but highly utilized from his work in this book and also his blog. And so, recommend that you, utilize this as a resource for you. If you have more detailed questions about anything that I do discuss tonight, you can use that as a resource. So with that, I will start. There we go, we already started. Most of the presentation will be general, but I did want to start this evening with a network map. So about YoloTD and Yolo bus and Beeline service that we offer. We have 16 routes, fixed route service. They all have varying fares ranging from $2 to $3.25. Next slide. And one of the first things I hope that you take from this is that ultimately in transit service planning, there are two competing goals, the ridership goal and coverage goal. And both goals are fine, they're great, they're competing. And there's no right or wrong answer on how many routes are considered transit routes, ridership routes versus coverage routes, but recognizing that we have to balance our resources, time, staff, money, between those two. The next slide. So this sort of shows a little bit more of that balance between ridership and coverage. So high ridership routes are routes that are more frequent, all day service. They are on routes that are in corridors that are dense, more walkable, linear, versus the coverage routes. Coverage routes are really, as the name implies, cover more geographic area. And they're often referred to sometimes as the equity routes because they do provide that lifeline of services for people who may otherwise not have any options for being able to get around a community. Next slide. And the second thing I hope you can take from tonight is that YoloTD transit service providers cannot do this alone. Ultimately, it really is cities that determine how successful, quote unquote, successful a transit service is. And we call this the three-legged stool of transit service planning. So two of those legs are controlled by the city. Those are the transit favorable land uses and the street network and pedestrian environment. And the third leg of the stool being fast, frequent, and reliable and safe transit, which is what YoloTD and other transit practitioners focus on. Next slide. So going right into it, if ridership is the goal, the first leg for transit favorable land uses, we need density. We need higher ridership means that there's more people around, and more people around usually leads to higher ridership and vice versa. Next slide. Linearity. So how direct of a connection can be made for our riders? We find that higher ridership are along corridors. Transit works best along corridors. It's called sometimes the string of pearls. And lower ridership, it can be found along routes that are more circuitous. There's more turns that are needed. The destinations are not aligned in any normal way, pleasing way. And we find that more turns for our buses means more delays and fewer people are choosing to ride transit if there's more delays. Next slide. And then proximity. How close are the origins to the destinations? Shorter trips are better than longer trips, and long distances between destinations mean a higher cost per passenger. And then mixed land uses. So higher ridership can be found, we find when there's mixed land uses attracting all kinds of trips, weekdays, weekends, all throughout the day. But lower ridership is usually found in places where there's homogeneous land uses. So things where, if housing is located in only one area, and then shopping centers, job centers, employment centers, activity centers are in another area. Having those separated can lead to lower ridership because of that. There's empty buses usually in one direction in different parts of the day. Next slide. And then the second leg that the cities can control, the street network and pedestrian environment, walkability. So how accessible really is the transit stop? We find that the transit that is located in areas where there is a street grid maximizes access, but things like train tracks, creeks, freeways, longer crossing distance along major roadways, those types of things really detract people from riding and ultimately choose to take another form of transportation. And also things like sidewalks and lighting, safety for our pedestrians, as they access transit is also important to riders. Next slide. And then the third leg that YoloTD and other transit service providers can more control. So these types of things include service levels. So how much service can we provide? Things like the number of operators, number of vehicles, and whether we provide peak or all-day service. Those types of things ultimately lead to higher frequency, longer spans, and higher passenger loads. Next slide. Route design. So deciding where the service should go, recognizing that routes should be symmetrical along arterials, as we talked about earlier, fast, fingers crossed, and our spaces, our bus stops are spaced appropriately. Next slide. So service productivity, how efficient or effective can it be? So the types of things that the metrics that we study all the time, boardings per hour, average daily riders, those types of things. But going back to what I was mentioning earlier, a lot of things that we look at when planning transit for transit is the density and walkability that I was mentioning earlier really tells us about the overall potential of the market. You know, are there a lot of people around? Can they get to where they want to go? And then linearity and proximity tell us about the cost. Are we going to be able to serve the market with short, fast, and direct routes, or will our costs be higher because we have to design service that uses indirect or longer paths that I was mentioning earlier? Next slide. And then, of course, bus stops. Everyone who rides our transit waits at a bus stop at some point, so we have to make sure that we accommodate them as best as we can. So we often hear from members of the public, city staff, you know, why can't you just move a bus stop? Just move this over here, get on a new one, right? It's totally fine. That's not necessarily the case. And changing or adding bus stops does take staff at least 6 months worth of work. And so the types of things we have to do, make sure that our operators are aware of the change, have to potentially go through trainings. We have to do an equity analysis. It's called the Title VI analysis. It's basically just making sure that if we are moving or adding or removing stops, that there's no disproportionate impacts to our equity priority communities within our ridership. Additionally, we want to make sure that we're near intersections. We want to make sure that the spacing to other bus stops makes sense. It doesn't make sense to have a bus stop in one block and then another one on the next route for the same route on the next block. That doesn't make sense. And also want to have a pair of stops. So if a bus is going in one direction and someone gets on in the morning, say, and then on the way back, they want to get off around the same location so they can go back to their final destination. They want to get off on the other side of the street. We want to make sure that that is available to them. So things like being near intersections or safe crossing locations is very important in considering that. Next slide. And in addition to having an ADA compliant bus stop, our buses themselves are also ADA compliant. So we ask that the stops be compliant for our ADA ramps. So all of our buses deploy ADA ramps outward. And so that requires 5 by 8 feet worth of space that is needed for both the ramp itself and also the space in front of the ramp for someone who's waiting with a mobility device, wheelchair, etc. So they want to make sure that they can access the ramp or get off the bus utilizing the ramp as safely as possible. So next slide. So some final thoughts and reminders. I'll repeat myself a little bit on this slide, but YoloTD does prefer 11-foot lanes. So all of our buses are 10.5 feet wide mirror to mirror. And so having 11-foot lanes allows for a little bit of wiggle room for our operators, but also recognizing that we want more pedestrians around and shorter crossing distances is great. So we're happy with the 11-foot lane width. YoloTD currently does not have a stated ridership versus coverage goal, so we may come back to you about that on SRTP. We also ask that we consider bus stop and bikeway interactions, and except at time points, bus boarding islands are crucial when separated bikeways are installed. We like separated bike lanes, they're fantastic, but as long as they're designed in such a way that we can still access a bus stop, and especially the time point is great. And then land uses can change over time. Change can be slow though, so we ask that you talk to us early and often. Transit suffers from the chicken and the egg problem. So if you build it, will they come? So recognizing that if you don't build for transit, it'll be that much harder to accommodate transit in the future. But developers can help fund transit improvements. We find that that's often needed for their own mitigation measures, TDM things. And they're asked to, can you pay for a bus stop? And that's a win-win-win for everybody. The city doesn't have to pay for it. We don't have to pay for it. The developers get their mitigation points. Everyone's happy. But we ask that that cities come to us and make sure that that is designed well and that we are happy we're able to access it. It is ADA compliant, et cetera. And again, the three-legged stool, cities really control 2 of the 3 legs of the transit service planning stool, and transit service changes takes at least 6 months worth of work. Next slide. So we'll end here with the short-range transit plan. So as I mentioned, it is ongoing network redesign. Most transit agencies undergo major redesigns between every 5 and 15 years. So we're certainly due for that. So schedule for you. We will in the spring, I believe in March now, it has been moved since the budget conversation. The existing conditions report will be shared with you, as well as the goals, objectives, and performance standards. And then that is the ridership survey results from last summer. And then in this summer, 2025, we'll come to you with draft recommendations for changes for what that network redesign could look like. And then by the end of this year, hopefully having adopted final recommendations. So with that, next slide. I will take your questions.
Perfect. I will bring it to my colleagues. Any questions? Yes,
Yeah.
Director Lauren.
I really appreciate your presentation. It's very fresh. Glad to have it. I just have some questions, mainly applying to the three-legged stool. One is the ridership recipe calls for higher ridership based on density. So how does this apply, or how does it adapt to rural settings?
I love this question, and because it's so difficult. It's challenging. So that's where if ridership is the goal, that is where density is needed. But for the coverage routes, density is not needed. It's going to be those areas are going to be theoretically covered anyway. And so that is where that balance needs to come in on how many routes, how much resources going towards those ridership routes, the ones that I mentioned earlier, that they're more frequent all day, et cetera, versus the coverage ones. So there's no right or wrong answer. It's just what are the priorities and how much goes towards each.
From where I sit in a rural town, it seems aspirational, but not practical. To be straight. And the other one, the ADA compliant measurements, does YTD or has YTD recently taken stock of that in our towns, because I can just tell you I'm interested in the winter stop at City Hall, and also it's lack of shade. It's really lovely. It's beautiful. It's on let me see if I get this right. It's on the south side of the street with no shade, and the buildings don't have any shade. So as the sun moves from east to west, it is in direct sun. We've had times like in July, 30 days of over 100 degrees. It's really hard to have people wait there, or when it's having one of those bomb cyclones. So I would hope that we could look at that stop as for shade and for ADA compliance. Thanks.
Director, Bernstein, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Yes, we do have a fairly recent inventory. I think it was done in 2023. We did an inventory of all of our bus stops throughout our system. And put all that, so we have all that spatially. So we have the location and a photo of the bus stop, and we've identified all the improvements that are needed in order to bring that up to code. And not surprisingly, it's very inconsistent throughout the system. Some places we have better stops, and other places we have inadequate ones. And so that's something that is we have that information in terms of the next steps, what we do with that. As far as going out and trying to update, all of those, that's something that we would have to factor into our capital budget. And of course, we would then go out and seek funding to do it. So that's something that we're not actively working on that now, but it is, we do have that inventory available.
Thank you.
And that is something that developers can also help pay for if they want to, for a mitigation plan.
Any other comments? Yes, Director Dulcich.
I'll just go real quick. Thank you for the book. Thank you for the presentation. Great overview.
All right, so do I have any other questions, comments before I open it up to public comment? All right, let's open it up to public comment. Do we have any public comment? All right, perfect.
Alan Hurst, thank you for sharing Jared Walker's book. He's a wonderful author. I wrote with him about 25 years ago. Bus stop standards. Each city public works department has to develop an ad hoc. We should have a standard for the entire county. That'd be a good thing to add to the short range transit plans, because the cities are what define and tell the developers what to put in. And I think that would be a really good contribution. And please remember trees. Thank you, Jesse, for remembering trees. Shades are so important. The city of Davis has put in some new bus stops at the cannery that were totally shadeless. It's pretty amazing. And they don't even put a spot for the backlight or the back entry into the bus, because public works department doesn't even work with Unitrans. We have some problems here. We respect a lot of our public works engineer. We should help them and provide some standards at the high level. SACOG should probably provide them. Land use. Again, YoloTD is a weak agency. The cities drive the land use planning. And the cities could impose lighting a landscape district on transit, even though this probably could, the cities probably could. So we need to explore this in the cities. And the cities define the density and what the city, right now there's a development proposal coming down the road in Hope Village Farms in Davis. And the most highly accessible corner in that development, the corner of Pole Line and Coville, they're putting a park instead of the apartment buildings. They're putting the housing away from the transit corridor. That's a detriment. Density by itself will do. You need to put density in your bus stops and the major corridors. And this YoloTD should be in there and advocating, but I know it's frankly a weak agency relative to the city. You guys need to be emissaries and the advocates for transit. I'm really disappointed that the transit operators, there's a density versus thing. It's choice riders versus transit dependent riders. Do people have a choice? That's the growth their opportunity is for us. People who are forced to take transit, they can't take bus, they can't drive. They're gonna take a bus, they're gonna take, it's the choice riders you want. We aren't talking about those. That's the 95%. This cars are so cheap, and we have e-bicycles, things like that. It's a choice race, and that's a direct right, that speed. And we need to talk about that thing. How do we get them into the buses? And I think that, and VMT, we need to talk about VMT, which is greenhouse gases, because that's the city goal, the state goal to reduce VMTs, and that's how you're going to get your money from I-80 mitigation fund in terms of reducing VMT. Empty buses don't produce VMT reduction. And we need to get, so we're not talking about that. I didn't hear any of this stuff. That's what we invest in transit, is to get people out of their cars so we get less DMT. And by the way, reduce traffic congestion too. That's another nice thing. So thanks for listening. But these are the sort of things you need to have in a short range transit plan this time. And the short range transit plan should articulate with the budget metrics and efficiency. So what you're looking for in the short range transit plan, these are the metrics we're going to put in there for our short range transit plan. They should show up in the budget. How are we doing on accomplishing the short range transit plans? So thank you for listening. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you. Additional public comment? Okay, yes.
Michael Barnbaum from Sacramento City and County. Thank you, Lola, for the wonderful presentation on Transit 101. I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on it. And there was a lot of mention about the short range transit plan and the calendar for calendar year 2025 in it and the next steps. Kind of want to go back in time a little bit prior to the retirement of former executive director Terry Bassett of Yolo Transportation District, and back when it was the Yolo County Transportation District. The staff then at the time rolled out in public workshops as part of the planning process, what was referred to as here's another acronym, COA, or Comprehensive Operational Analysis. And then it was called Yolo Go. That's where you had predominantly a lot of modifications and implementations of service on the 42 A and B. Davis had a lot of the changes occur in its city. You might remember, if you're a longtime rider of the 42 A and B, that went on Covell Boulevard. And it was more, not so much coverage, but it was more for speed and timing. Now, after the recommendations have gone through and the changes implemented, it is a better coverage, and it is actually getting better ridership by traveling through Lake Alhambra Estates over to Fifth Street and going straight over to the Memorial Union via Fifth Street. And it is getting more folks in the student housing complexes in that area of Davis that it never had before, because it was on Covell Boulevard. So the service changes can have a magnitude effect of whether you or not your goal is to get ridership in that respect or not. And that's a really good real world example, just here in Yolo County and in the city of Davis, that had been implemented. But now, we have to look at things of what service changes can be made and relate them to the budget. Is there a budgetary impact? What potential funding sources can there be? In Sacramento County, you've got the dedicated Measure A sales tax, not so much of a dedicated measure in Yolo County. But then they came the idea of the YoloTD managed lanes under this administration. And Sacramento and Placer County at SACOG are kind of gravitating to that a little bit. And I had advocated there a little over a year ago. Hold it though. This is Yolo County's idea. When the funds come from that through the CARTA, Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority, most of them need to go to Yolo County because it was their idea originally. And when those funds come through, then we could realize some of the fine tuning we want in the 42 A and B with the 16 trips, and to make the service truly a frequent service, whether it's peak or off peak at every 30 minutes frequency. And that would be a great goal to achieve with that additional funding source coming through. So I just kind of wanted to add into the presentation about that. And yes, excellent presentation. Look forward to some of these items coming to agendas throughout the current calendar year. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that public comment.
Yeah.
Any additional public comment in person? No. Public comment online?
There are no hands.
All right, public comment online, that will close public comment. I will bring it back to my colleagues. Any additional questions, comments? All right, no. Well then, since there is not an action connected to this, let's move on to item 7. Oh wait, was there? Sorry, don't touch. No, okay. Item 7, 2025 SACOG regional funding coordination. Brian is going to be coming up next. This does not have an action connected to it. It is informational.
That's right. Good evening, Chair Early, members of the board. The item before you relates to
Sorry, someone ran after someone. Okay.
relates to the SACOG regional funding round.
No, it's okay, it's okay. And everyone's fine.
Right?
It's gonna close.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You go ahead, I will check on.
So this item relates to the SACOG regional funding round, and more specifically, a specific color of money that they administer with this program. Next slide, please. The SACOG is responsible for allocating and awarding lots of funding about every couple of years. It's called a regional funding cycle. And so what we're gonna do this evening is sort of help it can be confusing. So we'll try to walk you through it, break it down into discrete little pieces so that it can make more sense of what we're trying to do here in Yolo County with respect to the STIP funding. So we'll help you understand what STIP funding actually is, how it relates to the regional funding program, the changes that SACOG is making with their STIP funding, why there's an opportunity for us to coordinate amongst the local agencies in response to their change in that program. And then what that would actually look like for us to coordinate. And then finally, what our role is in this whole process, as well as, what the next steps are in the process. So next slide, please. So STIP funding stands for State Transportation Improvement Program. It's state funding, it's not federal funding, and it does have some specific objectives for what it tries to achieve. It's a pretty, wide range of categories of projects it can fund, and it's a pretty big pot of funding. Next slide. And make sure I'm on my slide because that's too small for me to see. So if you look at this slide, so this is how SACOG used to administer their biennial regional funding program. So two types of funding really sort of build the funding foundation for it. There's three federal funds. The acronyms are less important than sort of where we're trying to go with with this presentation. But the state funding is STIP, State Transportation Improvement Program funds, and then those all get sort of put into a funding soup, and local agencies apply for competitive grant funding through the SACOG, the various SACOG programs. And then if they're awarded funding, they can be awarded any color of those federal and state funding. So that gives you a little bit of background on how they have typically administered their regional funding programs. Next slide, please. This year, they're doing something different. They're taking that state funding and separating it from the other three federal funding sources. All those federal funding sources will still exist, and all of our local agencies can still compete after for those funds through the SACOG programs. Just for a point of reference, over the past 5 cycles, the total regional funding program has ranged from a really low in 2019 of 60 million to a high of 128 million in the last cycle, with most clustering around 106, between 106 and 128 million. So that's typically where the entire program sort of lands in terms of total funding available. And so with them separating the STIP from the larger program, they're allocating this funding on a countywide population basis, and so the local agencies in each county will then be sort of competing for the funding that's allocated, the STIP funding that's allocated for their county. Next slide, please. Let's zero in on this a little bit more with respect to the 4-county STIP program. This is that one that broke away from the rest of the regional funding program. And so this year they're expecting about $42.9 million, almost 43 million of total STIP funds, being allocated to the region. Sacramento was expected to have roughly 32, Yolo County, roughly 6 million, Yuba and Sutter both between 2 and 3 million. What SACOG is also intending to do is to set aside anywhere from 10% to 50% of those countywide allocations into a regionally competitive STIP program. So all of the local agencies in Yolo County could also apply to that regionally competitive STIP program to fund, larger projects that may not make sense to apply for within their county, or the county may not be getting enough money to be applying for a large project. So Yolo is expected to be allocated anywhere from 3 million to 5.6, depending on how much regional set aside the SACOG board decides. Best guess is that they'll probably land somewhere between 20 and 25%, which would leave us, well, we'll get to that in a future slide. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Next slide, please. So this does leave us with the opportunity for coordinating $6 million. If you're familiar with transportation capital programming, $6 million does not go very far. And we have 8 agencies in Yolo County that are eligible for those funds. So we could continue to do what we always do, and that's to everybody just kind of competes against each other, but competing for $6 million may not be the most efficient way to approach such a small pot of funding. The other option, which we've been exploring with your staff through the YoloTD Technical Advisory Committee, is to coordinate and come up with a type of proportional sub-allocation or fair share, which would be sort of the basis for moving forward and approaching the STIP funds. Next slide, please. All right, so this shows what option number 1 free for all would look like. You see all of us just sort of competing for the small amount of funding. Next slide. But there's some advantages. Each option has advantages and disadvantages. In an open competition or free for all option, any individual agency has an opportunity to take a larger percentage of that $6 million, so they could earn more funding. Disadvantages is that there's a lot of resources that are dedicated at the staff level and in consulting costs and so forth to prepare grant applications. And then each individual agency has less certainty of funding because all of the agencies are competing against each other with no guarantee that they would get any funds. Option number 2 has advantages in terms of providing local agencies with certainty and having a certain specific allocation of funding that would be available to them if they have competitive projects. So they're not spent. So the Technical Advisory Committee, like this idea because they would know that they don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time and energy on preparing grant applications. Of course, the disadvantage is that you don't have the opportunity to be awarded as much funding as in option 1. Okay, so what would coordination look like? Next slide. So as we've been discussing this in the TAC, we've been discussing this since July of last year, is what they want to do, at least what they prefer in this cycle, is that since the funding is being allocated on a population basis, that all agencies would sort of be made whole in this cycle. That's their sort of preference. But we needed to define what a proportional sub-allocation means, and to ensure that the outcomes are equitable for all of the eligible agencies. And so where we've kind of landed on that so far, again, these are continuing conversations and subject to more, including input from this board. We're currently working within an equal weight average of population versus road miles, because, for example, the more urbanized agencies have higher populations and lower road miles, and like Yolo County has lots of road miles, but a lower percentage of the countywide population. That's what the next slide sort of shows you, how those averages kind of play out over across those two criteria. Next slide. So we at YoloTD put together some scenarios for the TAC, to think about, and we also have to look at this within the context of the SACOG regional set aside. So if you're assuming either a 20 or 25% set aside, you're looking at about $4.9, $4.6 million respectively being allocated, directly to Yolo County. And then we would just simply apply their each agency's, percentage average, which is there in the second column. To what their sub allocation would be. Now, YoloTD doesn't have road miles of population, so we just have a placeholder amount of approximately 10%, which could shift either way. But for now, it's just sort of, like I said, a placeholder. You can see there isn't a whole lot of funding that gets, distributed to, I'm using that term very loosely because this funding is not, allocated directly to the agencies. This is for the purposes of our discussion, sort of a theoretical sub-allocation. To access these funds, grant applications still have to be submitted to SACOG. And then they have to be awarded by SACOG. So next slide, please. This might make more sense when we get to this next slide, which is how a local agency within Yolo County would make their decision and how to access that STIP funding. So what they would do is they would first look at their sub-allocation amount and they would decide, is this enough funding to make it worthwhile to go after STIP funds, because STIP funds are really, resource intensive just to even obligate. And if they look at their allocation and they said there's not enough here, then that sub-allocation would just carry over to the next STIP cycle. It doesn't get reprogrammed. It doesn't go back to the region for reprogramming. It doesn't go back to the state. It sort of stays within the county. If they do have a project that's worth, applying to the STIP grant program, they would decide if they want to, apply for a new project or an existing project that may just need sort of the last piece of funding. And so then they would go to SACOG staff and have a pre-application consultation, because we're talking about, this is still a competitive grant program in SACOG's mind, right? And so they need to make sure that the project is first eligible for the STIP funding and that it would meet a minimum scoring threshold, right? So if it wouldn't be a competitive project in the program, then they would say, well, look, you probably shouldn't submit this because, it doesn't meet sort of the minimum scoring criteria for being awarded a fund or to be awarded funding. So if the answer to that question was no, then the local agency would need to choose a different project that would compete better within the grant program, or they would just decline to submit, and then that sub-allocation would carry over to the next cycle. But if their project does meet the eligibility and it does meet a minimum scoring threshold, and they are submitting for up to but not exceeding their sub-allocation amount, then they could submit their application and have pretty good certainty that it would be funded. So next slide, please. So what this table shows you sort of how that might look like over subsequent cycles. So in this scenario, the third and fourth column sort of shows, we're pretending here about what each local agency might do. So here, in this case, Davis and Woodland would be applying for their sub-allocation of funds. And West Sacramento, Winters, and UC Davis / Unitrans don't apply for theirs. Yolo County does. But Woodland doesn't apply for all of theirs because their project doesn't need their full sub-allocation. So that leaves $346,000 that would carry over to 2027. Davis wouldn't have any carrying over to 2027 because they're applying for their full sub-allocation. YoloTDs would carry over completely, and so forth. And then what happens in the 2027 STIP cycle, in this scenario, we're imagining that, there's a reduction. We're pretending that there's a 10% reduction in the 2027 cycle. And so their theoretical sub-allocation plus the carryover from 2027 shows how much programming capacity there would be, within the county and for each local agency. So the point here is to show that, each local agency can kind of figure out what's best for them and decide how they might want to use, how they might want to program that funding over time and over multiple cycles. All right, next slide. So what is YoloTD's role? It's important to emphasize that YoloTD doesn't actually have a decision-making role in this process. The only thing that we're doing, throughout this process is to facilitate conversations between, our member agencies towards outcomes that they think would be most beneficial to them. And so we've had 3 or 4 meetings and having, really productive conversations as to, the benefits and drawbacks of trying to coordinate on one hand versus, continuing to approach these cycles, competing against each other. We've also, I mentioned, analyzed different scenarios. One thing we can do is we can facilitate an MOU between the member agencies. If they decide that they do want to take this approach, we'll probably require an MOU to make sure that everybody understands what they're committing to and what their obligations are as participants in this coordinated approach. And on the back end, what we can do is we can track all of this, right? Because SACOG doesn't, they're only interested in the funding that's going out to the county by population. It would be us on our end who would be tracking all of these sort of different sub-allocations because they're just theoretical. And then we could be tracking this over multiple STIP cycles. And we can also, facilitate and record, fund swap agreements if there's any special arrangements that, like maybe one of the smaller agencies wants to, swap their STIP funds for more flexible, like general fund from another agency. That could be a fine outcome too. We just would be following that so everybody sort of knows what's happening with respect to this program. Next slide. So that brings us to our next steps. The release of the STIP cycle is coming up soon. It's expected, I think, to be like towards the end of March, early April. What our member agencies need to do is decide whether or not they want to, take this coordinated approach. And if they do, then we'll probably need to make some refinements to the calculations, like, do we have the road miles correct? Do we have the populations correct? Is the YoloTD set aside percentage correct? And then they would need to formalize that in whatever way that requires with their decision makers. If that requires going to board of directors or city council or whatever it may be, they need to sort of, whatever that formalization process looks like, they need to do that. And then we would need to, help them develop and execute an MOU between the agencies. And then finally, we could bring it back to so this group understands what decisions have been made and make, a largely symbolic endorsement, because again, this board doesn't actually have any decision-making control over the STIP funds, but it would tie up, conclude that process so that everybody understands what's advancing. And then after that, the member agencies would approach this cycle and subsequent STIP cycles, consistent with the MOU. And I think that's the end of my formal presentation. Again, we're not seeking recommendations, just bringing you up to speed on the conversations that have been occurring. And, happy to answer any questions if you have any.
I'll take my colleagues. Questions, comments? All right, Dr. Dulcich.
It's either gonna be an easy one or a confusing one. Back on, I think it's your slide 5-ish, the 4-county SIP program. And the regional set aside. This one? Yes, exactly.
Got it.
And that explains the wide range, the regional set aside 10 to 50%.
Yeah,
Is that the staff recommendation or what's that?
So the SACOG board hasn't taken action on what percentage they want to set aside for the regional STIP program. And SACOG staff, for those of you who are on the SACOG board, probably may have seen variations of this. The current range is from 10% to 50%. So there's a huge range, and they'll land on, one of those percentage options. They just haven't done that yet.
And that's population or another factor?
On the percentage.
Yeah.
Politics.
It's it's up to the SACOG board. I mean, they have to decide how much they want to, this is really their, A bigger regional set aside means all of the agencies in the region competing for that money versus it kind of being more formulaically given to the counties. And so it allows for bigger projects that are regionally significant would be able to compete for those funds.
And also it means that, all the counties get less, right? So you're trying to decide between 10 and 50% of what your county is getting that will then go into this bigger pot. Which also means it's kind of like playing the lottery, right? Yeah, you're also competing against more, folks in that regional pot too. Yes, Director Chapman.
I could do one more.
Oh, yes, go, my bad, Director Dulcich.
It's down on the what does coordination look like page, the kind of, I think you're throwing this out as a scenario that we need to discuss.
Or 5 kilos.
Oh, this one. The fair share, sub-allocation, road line.
Yes.
Okay. I don't think UC Davis has ever taken the STIP money for our infrastructure. It has all gone, I believe, direct to Unitrans. So there would be a rational conversation about, well, maybe Unitrans is more like YoloTD in this example. And that would just need to play out in the conversations.
Yeah.
And then some of the tune-ups that could happen, like I think the population for UC Davis on campus is much more than the 8,229, but that would be part of that.
That's all part of the refinement moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Right, next, Director Chapman and then Director Barracks.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. This is, I think, a great example of why the workshops are needed to kind of put some clarity to some of this. Just 2 quick questions that, just to, before we do public comment. The one that you talked about was the, on disadvantages of option 2 around coordination proportional. It says less opportunity for large grant award from this pot of funding, but that in that allocation, but that you still have the ability to apply the SACOG to that larger pot to get that funded. Right? I mean, it's kind of worded in a way that makes it seem like you lose the opportunity to do that, but you still can take that project and submit it to the larger six county process.
Yeah, you could also submit a larger project to the STIP set aside component, and then you can also submit larger projects to the programs that are administering the other 3 federal colors of money.
Right, yeah. And then, so I think I heard you say, so even if the board, I know it's not an action, but said, hey, we want to do this equal share piece, that still requires the full grant submission?
Can you repeat the question again?
Under like, we talked about like equal share and the different scenarios. So if it goes to the equal share, that still requires each jurisdiction to do a full grant application.
If they want to try to access their sub-allocation.
Their sub-allocation.
You're
that's
still doing that application process though. Like you still have to write the grant, you still have to do the things. I say only, I'm sorry, I'm getting used to being shared. You must stop talking. I'll wait till the end.
It's out of there, so. Yeah, you're happy to hear it.
The only thing, so excellent point, because one of the pros cons that was listed was, well, if we had these assigned percentages, you wouldn't have to have staff writing a grant, or that's what it appeared to be, but that's actually not the case. In order to access even this guaranteed dollars, your staff would still have to put together a competitive grant. Even if you're not competing here, your grant still needs to be competitive enough for SACOG, because they're going to score it. I think that's the part that's being missed here. Even if we say like, okay, you have your pot, everyone has your pot, you still have to put together a competitive grant that SACOG then will use their same standards to score. And so I don't necessarily I don't see that as a true pro to having all of us assign a percentage if you still have to do all that work.
Yeah, there's some work, but not as much, because what would normally happen is, let's say you have $6 million and everybody's competing for it. Essentially, everybody has to submit an application if they want to get any funding from this cycle, right? So, and then usually they'll be submitting multiple applications as opposed to maybe just one, because they're just hoping that that something will get funded, and they don't necessarily, have a way to be strategic about, how they might be able to receive state funding. So yes, in this circumstance, you could look at, say, these hypothetical $1 million allocations, right? And really, that's not even really enough it's barely enough to make it worthwhile going after SIP. So theoretically, in this cycle, our local agencies could say, look, we're just gonna bypass this entire cycle. And we'll let it all carry over to the next cycle until we have enough to make it worthwhile to pursue the SIP funding. But if you don't do that, then everybody is back in the money is there. We all just need to, we're all just, need to compete against each other, because if we don't agree to coordinate, then somebody's gonna go for all of it.
And if I may, importantly, in this case, you still have to write the application, but you know you're gonna get the money.
Right.
Whereas you might
Well,
write the application, you have.
Do you actually know that you're gonna get the money? Cause SACOG
Well,
could
so-
say to you, this is actually not a competitive project.
So one of the steps here is that pre-consultation, right? So you have that pre-consultation, and at that point, does this meet the minimum criteria or not? Because if it does meet the minimum criteria, then you go ahead and submit an application and you really do it.
Yeah, right. And that's part of the benefit of of kind of the coordinated approach, right? Is that you do know through that process that's laid out here, that you're basically gonna be getting those dollars, and then from the city, all of our jurisdictions, you can then kind of plan on that, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we heard
Yeah.
from the SACOG board
Mhm.
meeting, was kind of this desire to have an approach that allowed agencies to better plan around it and not be kind of up in the air of knowing, am I gonna get anything? Am I gonna get one project or none, or what that was, right? And that's kind of what this, I think overall what the conversation there was as well, was that it provides certainty to it, right?
That's
Which I think
exactly
is a benefit.
Yeah.
There's other things, but.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good job.
I'm good.
Okay, Director Ferris?
Thanks. A couple of quick things. So appreciate the overview. Just a couple of quick items. So I think one of the things that's been driving this change at SACOG has been the inability of local government, or local agencies to use their dollars for fixing roads, right? That was that's been consistently this theme that's come up, how many dollars to literally just repave roads. That's been a real challenge. So this, I think why would any of the agencies have to apply with an application to say, we're gonna take our $1 million and essentially just use it for repaving of roads? It seems like a lot to have to do that, if that's
Yeah.
really what this is intended for.
Yeah,
That's the first question. Yeah, that's the question. No, that's the first question.
Oh, yeah, the reason why it still needs to go through a competitive sort of evaluation process is because from SACOG's standpoint, they have to achieve greenhouse gas emissions and VMT reduction.
Sure,
So they can't, and the STIP program doesn't allow you to just use it only for repaving existing roads. You can use the funding to repave road, but you also need to make other enhancements to it that, support.
Right, bike lanes.
Exactly.
Reduction to VMT.
Yep.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, thanks, that's really helpful. So in this sort of what does coordination look like approach, right? Do we have to have all agencies coordination? And then what happens if one or more agencies decide to go with them?
The calculations fall apart because what happens is if one agency says we don't want to participate, what they're saying is we want to apply for more than our sub allocation, which throws off everybody else's sub allocation because they're getting less than their fair share. So if somebody's going after more than their fair share, then everybody may as well go after more than their fair share.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. I appreciate that. I had the same question that Director Dulcich had about sort of previously, in previous cycles, UC Davis had not received direct sort of allocation. It's been more on the Unitrans side of things. So I think it's curious.
Yeah, we can correct it. Where it stands right now, any agency that has a master agreement with Caltrans is eligible for STIP funding. They could apply if they have a master agreement with Caltrans. So yeah, we can do more refinement there, and it may be that Unitrans makes more sense being bundled in with, the city of Davis because they're providing, the local transit service for Davis. So I think we can settle that within the TAC.
Okay, thanks. And then a couple other quick points. This is primarily for the SACOG board, but it's for staff too, I guess, but you know, for the SACOG board members that are here, which are most of this board, like, any sense of where the SACOG board is gonna go on the percentage on the allocation, right? 10 to 50% is a big range, and I get there's politics involved and such, but just, you know, got basically the entire Yolo contingent here, so, or well, except for the Yolo County part of it, Supervisor Vegas, so what do you guys think? I mean, just curious about where it's headed or any sense of that.
Sure, yeah, I mean, from the brief conversation we had at that meeting, I think it was last month. There were some folks advocating to not have any of it, take 100%, right? There were some agencies that wanted that were making public comment. From what I experienced, it was in that kind of 30% range, 25 to 30%. There was a, you know, recognition, acknowledgement that we need to have this larger regional pot. And I think one of the things that we talked about was a good example is, you know, the I-80 project, the funding that came through SACOG for that probably wouldn't have happened if that pot was much smaller, right? So the process of looking at it from the regional perspective is what a lot of folks at that meeting were talking about, but also acknowledging that there needs to be enough dollars in that set aside pot to make it worth it, right? And, you know, if you're down to, you know, it's down to 20,
$30,000.
then it's, yeah, exactly. So there was this recognition of trying to strike that balance between having a large pot and also having an amount that can be impactful to other agencies.
Last quick point, which is, and it's again for especially our colleagues that are on the SACOG board, I think it's around, you know, one of the consistent issues for a number of years now has been this issue of some of the larger jurisdictions they do want the dollars to just go out the door for, especially, you know, on the proper population base, for example, you know, because why wouldn't Sacramento County want to get all the money, the lion's share of the money, or City of Elk Grove or whatever, right? I get that. So I do think some of it can go out. So I think competitively is, and generally is the way to go. I think proportionally there's some merit to do some of it, you know, a little bit or some of it that way. But I do think that fundamentally at the end of the day, like the competitive process is very important, because otherwise small jurisdictions like Winters, for example, or in this case, even a YTD or whatever, are not gonna end up getting, you know, they wouldn't get very much. I mean, and I think on the whole, they have much better chance of submitting a competitive project and getting those dollars, is what it seems like. I mean, even in certainly West Sacramento has a long, you know, pretty strong track record of competing with really good submissions and getting dollars. And I think that, you know, it's just, I would just caution to be very wary of the whole, you know, large agencies saying, we just want it to be doled out based on essentially population. I mean, maybe a few other factors too, but I think that is it's a pretty untenable situation probably for a lot of smaller jurisdictions or even medium-sized jurisdictions. So there's a couple comments. Yeah. Appreciate that.
I think it's fair. In regards to your question around, because we sat in the transportation committee meeting, that I think that's where this question came up, right?
Yeah.
Was there, and I would say at least Yolo and probably a couple of our other small counties came in around like 20% is what we said. I think I actually said 20% as well as the set aside in that recommendation to the larger board on SACOG. I'll be curious where they actually end up. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry,
No,
I would
please.
just in an additive way say, yeah, it wasn't above 30.
No.
It was lower than that, yeah.
Any other, I had just one additional question. Before we take to public comment, I haven't forgotten about public comment. In regards to, and Director Ferricks brought this up, how has Yolo County done previously? So I appreciate this idea of setting aside percentages, and so we don't compete against each other and all of that great stuff. I would be fascinated just, and you may not have this information, but I would like it to know who has in the past competed and sort of the larger, right? Because it wouldn't have been Yolo County specific. How successful have districts been in Yolo County at getting those larger dollars? Because it might be a good indication of how they would do locally at county level as well. So that would be helpful, at least for me to know.
So is your question, how has each county essentially done over the course of many previous cycles?
Not just county, because as my colleague said, our cities have competed for those
Yeah.
dollars as well. It hasn't
Well,
just been like.
Yeah, I'm
Yolo
thinking
County.
about all the local agencies within the counties.
Mhm.
I don't have that in
No,
front of me.
no, yeah.
But at one time I did do, because I was kind of curious, because these
I'm
sorts of
fascinated.
questions have popped up over the course of the last 25 years. So one time on my own, I did sort of do that exercise. And it came out that, everybody pretty much got what ultimately ended up getting, what they were reasonably entitled to, over the span of, 5 or 6.
Interesting.
So, and What-
And the reason why I ask is I actually feel like, City of West Sacramento's probably punched above its weight pretty consistently, and so I'm kind of surprised to hear like, oh, what you would have gotten based on your, because, we're like 55,000 strong. So-
Well, yeah, and West Sacramento did really good in the early years, and then things things just sort of balance out over time. I think, SACOG is just generally like sort of ensuring that there's,
Basically,
that there's generally equity in the program over multiple cycles, while still trying to obtain the objectives of their programs.
is that a question, not necessarily doesn't have to go back to the board, but I would actually like an answer to that, just as we're thinking, because I guess my question to you is, are you gonna need a recommendation from us from the YoloTD side of this?
It wouldn't be a necessity, but we would bring it back to this group just for, final endorsement of what the local agencies all sort of agree to approaching this.
Although we all have our own local agencies that we're coming back from, YoloTD has a dog in this fight too. I appreciate that we had talked earlier and you're like, oh, but I see us listed here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and so would we not,
Actually, you're
from a
correct.
county perspective, would we not
No,
get?
you're correct. We would bring it, yeah.
Okay,
We would
I'm
need to
just
get
trying to-
action. We would need to get, a board action for our participation in, in this approach.
I would imagine, but that's why I was asking.
Mhm.
So what's the general plan or thought on that? Because today is just informational, so we won't be voting.
Yeah, so I mean, what we really need to get are some, decisions from the local agencies.
Okay.
We need them to raise it up their flagpoles and to, let us know fairly soon, because
What's
we have to,
soon?
well,
Because you said it's opening up soon, that's why
yeah, I mean, if the program launches in late March, we're not we've got, 2 months. So I would think in the next month, we would need to know, and that means they need to have time to bring it to their boards and city councils. I mean, we can back.
I mean,
up
I'm like
the schedule.
working backwards from the
Yeah.
date that you're saying. I actually don't know if all of that is possible by March.
Yeah, we don't know either.
Okay.
So, and that's an okay outcome too, if there's just too much to try to unravel. And we just can't get it, everything coordinated the way we need to, that's okay. Leave us back to where we would have been anyway. And at least we would have set the foundation for how we might want to approach this in future cycles.
For the next year. Director Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, sorry, I'm not trying to belabor, I'm trying to play, so, but the action that you would need from us in terms of an MOU that we would agree upon would be basically looking at one of the options that are presented here, or a different one that may happen, and then just us agreeing on that as a board, right, from our jurisdictions, that we want to go at it alone, or that we want to go in a collaborative process, right?
Or each of your jurisdiction
Right.
boards would need to decide if you want to participate in this approach. So that decision gets made at the Davis City Council.
Right,
Yolo
sure.
County. And then what we bring to this board is whether or not YoloTD wants to participate in this
Right.
coordination. And then we could have sort of a symbolic action
Sure.
that endorses the whole thing, but this board doesn't actually
No, I
can't
understand.
control what the
Yeah.
individual.
No, I understand, I guess for me, I'm trying to figure out why that's not possible by the end of March.
Well, so we don't even know if it's by the end of March. So I would maybe start, that's why I said it'd be helpful to know like what the actual date is, to work backwards from there. Cause that is the drop dead date.
Right.
And ideally, you're probably trying to get all that agreement done before that drop dead date. So that SACOG could address it accordingly, but on top of that. It sounds like potentially each of our city councils would have to vote on it,
Right.
and you got.
Yeah,
Certain number of meetings, all the priorities that happen at that. And then obviously I think, because we only deal with this, it might be easier for us to
Sure.
throw it on a February agenda. depending on when it happens in March, maybe we throw it on March or have a special meet, like, do you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
cause
Yeah, no, I totally, I'm trying to figure if there's a way for us to get that information. And then back to us so that we can talk with our respective staff to say, look, we basically have, you know, a month and a half time period to get this done before it comes back to YTD in the beginning of March. Right? I mean, that gives us, the two means I don't. To me, it's just a decision of us coming, I don't know, maybe I'm
I
overthinking,
mean,
but I just.
our board,
that
I don't
decision.
think it's,
I
I
don't
don't
think
think it
that
would
long
be
to do.
our board, that's what I don't imagine would be the holdup. I just imagine all the different municipalities, but I could be wrong, maybe I'm misjudging government moving slow.
It's worth mentioning that, you know, late March is when we think they're gonna launch, but that's not necessarily the close date. So if we think things are moving in the right direction, and everybody kind of knows what they're gonna do, then we could be using some of that time within the open window of submitting applications to finish up this process.
I mean, I feel one just quick comment, which is just, I mean, you know, so if the need is for each of our jurisdictions to sort of put this on an agenda to have a discussion and ideally approve it, I mean, like, you know, I'm pretty confident I can get it on the next board of supervisors agenda, which is January 28th. So, I mean, that's just one, and I think that that's doable. So,
Taken care of.
yeah, well, I mean, no guarantees, but I think that, I mean, it's just, I mean, if we have several months and, you know, just kind of do it, it feels like there's an ability to get, I mean, yeah. So,
Yeah, and what is possible that that, you know, any individual agency's process, it doesn't require, you know, elevating all the way up to, you know, a board discussion. Maybe it's a consent item, maybe it's
right, exactly.
city manager
Yeah.
decision, but it just, you know, it just needs to happen because somebody has to be authorized to, you know, sign on to the MOU.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, I guess I was just getting nervous, not to belabor this and go back to, I was getting nervous that we were kind of like saying, well, we don't know if we can get this done, it's gonna take so long to do it. I think in terms of the process that we're laying for, I think it's really important for us when this funding cycle opens, for us to have an understanding of what that is, right? What we're doing and how we're moving forward, and whatever approach we come up with or agree to or don't agree to. I do think that when that opens, we need to have that done, right? I mean, it's not an insignificant amount of money, so I just want to make sure I can commit tomorrow to be talking internally and figure out how we can get this done, we can move it, and I just want to make sure that we
So
get this done and.
I think I'm maybe hearing that there, which is that we set some sort of a deadline. And maybe it's March 1st or something along those lines, that we ask each of the jurisdictions, again, this is not a formal action, because this is an informational item, but that maybe we as staff ask the jurisdictions to try to make a decision by March 1st, if not a formal action, at least a decision on which way they intend to go.
Yeah, I'm looking at Kimberly, making sure that if we give this direction, that's okay.
Yeah, yes, we can have some direction.
Okay, perfect. Director Vega, did you want to say something?
No, just say, that seems reasonable. I think we could make that happen.
And our TAC is meeting monthly now as opposed to quarterly to work our way through this, and we meet next week. And so we'll be able to, I can share with them this conversation, and then, you know, that's when the internal dialogue can start occurring.
What day are you guys meeting next week?
Say,
I got it,
yeah,
just a minute, I'll get there.
All right, while Director Bernstein's looking at that, I'm looking now to my right. I think Director Dulcich has some comments, yeah.
I'll make a simple point, and it's more from my prior staff role. Having a carryover mechanism is really appealing. So if there's a way to get there and create this kind of consensus, it would be a great opportunity to allow better projects to proceed with more funding. So I'm just pointing a little bit of encouragement from that perspective. Thank you.
I appreciate that. So, Director Dulcich talked about carryover being a positive. Go ahead, Director Bernstein.
Sorry,
No, you're good.
so the TAC meeting is on Tuesday, the 21st.
Would there be a cap on the carryover? So what happens, I mean, maybe this isn't realistic, but this is also why I would be fascinated to know how municipalities have done previously, just at the global level. Paying just carry over indefinitely, I mean, because those are dollars basically from the pool that potentially other municipalities could be tapping into. I would just be fine.
Well,
Have you guys discussed that?
well, part of the MOU would sort of control and prevent that from happening, right? And then SACOG isn't going to reprogram those funds to other counties, those stay with our county, so on. So that's one of the reasons for the MOU is to sort of, you know, protect each agency's interest with respect to their allocated amounts.
I know, but what you're actually, the question I'm asking, so I appreciate that. So at the county level, they would be protected and really this is maybe a two-parter. The first question would be, at what point, is it 5 years? Is it 10? That, 7
Yeah.
that you say like, okay, these have carried over. I mean, yeah. Again, I'm familiar with government. I have a, you know, development agreement that's 20 years old, right? So like, at what point do you say like, okay, you've had your chance, these are gonna go back into the Yolo County pot for those to compete against? Have you guys even talked about that?
No, we haven't talked about
Is
that.
that
That's a good
crazy?
point.
Is that
No, I think that we should, you know, look at the MOU and coordinate, you know, each cycle to make sure that it's still, you know, it's working for everybody. I haven't thought about it like an expiration date essentially of each agency's allocation. I don't know how, you know, the TAC or, you know, other electeds would feel about that. I don't know that anybody would want that, you know, that risk might not be, you know, might not be appealing to them.
What would be the risk? Just from your.
Well,
perspective.
if you stay.
You said like, you got 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. And then if you don't, you know, if you don't essentially obligate those funds within that 10-year period, that it goes back to the county for other county agencies to grab, I don't know what the collective response to that would be.
Don't wait 10 years.
Yeah, well, the other thing to consider is that, you know, the smaller agencies don't have large allocations, right? So it makes the most sense.
Are you thinking 20?
No,
I mean,
I didn't want to interrupt, but I was like, yes, so I would just say, for an example, that, say Winters has some transportation dollars, but it's not enough to get anything done, like they're not gonna pave one street and then ignore everything else. So we wait, you know, until we've built enough up to do a project that makes sense. So with that being one of the smaller jurisdictions, if not the smallest, that, you know, that would I say do it in 20 years or 10 years? I think that it kind of depends on the project. So I don't necessarily want a cap.
Yeah, at this stage, I wouldn't recommend putting a cap just because it's the first, you can always make amendments to the MOU if we decide that, you know, something needs to be changed, but I think for the first iteration to get everybody on board and everybody feeling good about it, that we wouldn't, you know, I don't think we would want to include that language.
Director Dolcich.
I was gonna say like it might be, like it's a great thing to have a carryover ability to sort of think 3 to 5 years out.
Yeah.
Most city councils want to get something done and spending that money will become like a thing. And I think be motivated from that perspective. Also, the money will not escalate with inflation. So if the longer you carry over, the less you get done. So
Yeah.
I think for those reasons, the cities would be inclined to spend in the 3 to 5 year range and not
And then 10, 20.
10 to 30, yeah. It will solve itself kind of.
Last question that at least I have, and then we need to take the public comment. So the allocations potentially would change year to year, or is it every couple years?
It changes with each cycle, right? So SACOG gets an estimate of how much DIP funds will be available for programming. And then they would be applying their countywide proportional, population-based allocations. And that would determine how much, and it varies quite, you know, it can vary from cycle to cycle. So wouldn't necessarily expect to have the same amount in the next cycle available as there was in this. But either way, if you don't, program your funds in this cycle, those funds still carry over, and then you just add on whatever the next cycle, whatever that allocation was to that.
What are the cycles?
About every 2 years.
2 years, okay. Right, let's,
Oh, yes.
Director Vega, yes.
So in the free for all scenario, if the set aside is not possible,
Wait, what do you mean?
is what I'm
The
Oh,
carryover.
sorry, the carryover, so if
It's not gonna carry over.
there's nothing to carry
Yeah.
over, it's just every year or every cycle
Yeah.
we're going into.
Yeah, because there would be enough applications for SACOG to program all of it.
Ideally.
Most, yeah, I would say, I think that, yeah, there would probably be enough applications to go.
All right, I want to open it up to public comment now. Come on down. 3 minutes.
Hi, okay, so there's about a couple of schools of thought here from the Sacramento city and county side, and I'll get to the other school of thought in a moment. So I think that there will be more of a separate process for the STIP allocation when it comes to the jurisdictions over there, especially with all the cities over there and the city and county of Sacramento. So I think that would be separate from the discussion I'm hearing about Yolo County and all the cities on this board. But the second school of thought is, putting a hat on of Yolo Transportation District. And I'm hoping maybe to get a little clarification, whenever we talk about funding opportunities, whether it's STIP, TDA, CARTA, anything, you always have to ask yourself, is there an opportunity in that funding allocation, if you can get an application successful, that it could go toward operating or capital? And my thought is, okay, if it's operating, we've always talked about the 16 missing trips on the 42 A and B to make the schedule fine-tuned and every 30 minutes from throughout its span of service. But also the operating, as I said earlier in the meeting, we're not going to forget about winners. And we need to get that idea of funding the route from the Davis station to the Vacaville station or the Vacaville Transportation Center via Highway 128 and 505. So that there is great connectivity from the winners communities to both of the stations on through each highway. And nobody is going to have to be told, well, if you're going to go from Davis station to Vacaville station, just get on the train. Well, that doesn't work if you're in winners. You got to have service in winners, and a fixed route service is something we need to inform and advocate for simultaneously, in addition to all this thing about getting the 42 A and B to every 30 minutes. So I guess my question on the table for this item, and specific though to STIP, is it something during the 2-year cycle that you can use for operating funding and carrying out your operating costs in your operating budget, or is it very strict and only to be for capital budgetary matters only? And if that's the case, what are the other opportunities coming forward that could go for operating? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Next public comment, Mr. Hirsch.
Hey, thank you very much for listening. I'm not sure what it will do, because you've already seemed to have made your decision. You haven't really taken public input, so that's a disappointment, but I'll share my thoughts anyway. I believe that everybody wants to get no limited competition, to get it easy, get a social promotion. I believe that competition raises our game and improves the innovation, and so I believe that we should have as much competition among the grants. I think that's a good thing. And I think it's insulting to basically call the grant applications a waste of time, as staff has done. I think they're an opportunity to show, staff to show that we have innovative ideas, and we can reward the best and newest and innovative breakthrough ideas. So what staff has chosen to call, I think it's disrespectfully, the free-for-all is actually the competitive program, and I think that's the best way to get them up to good. And let me point out on the sheet that was put together, they have twice as many advantages for the program they like, the dedicated versus the free-for-all program, and twice as many disadvantages for the free-for-all program versus the other one. So I just note that in terms of how we put the thumb on the needle here. And I would suggest that the objectives for this particular program are all about innovation in terms of reducing VMT and greenhouse gases and whatnot. And in which case, that will favor competitive programs that are gonna do some really innovative things. Because I've seen that lots of cities, they love to do things like you can justify tree planting for all these wonderful green things. And you can get transportation money to plant trees around bus stops. And I love trees and they're wonderful. But most cities basically use their general fund to do that. So cities will tend to backfill their general fund with transportation funds to do other things like parks and whatnot. That's a tendency, and I can name projects done by all the cities here where you basically take a transportation list and backfill transportation, use transportation to backfill your general fund. This is the competitive program that's focused on the best possible transportation projects, or one of these innovative things should be retained, I think. There's something to say for the holdbacks and things like that, but I think the competition aspect outweighs them all. So that's what I would vote for, and the best. So for what it's worth, you've already made your decision, but that's some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hirsch, for your public comment. I would like to note, I actually haven't made a decision, but I mean, I appreciate you saying that. No. Any other public comment online?
There are no hands.
Perfect. I'm gonna bring it now back to my colleagues. Any additional questions, comments? Okay, I'm seeing no.
And just to be clear, we don't have a position on this. We're facilitators for what the local agencies, are asking us to do. So we're fine with whatever outcome emerges from it.
I will say, so I appreciate that. But I had the same feeling looking at this that we heard in our public comment in regards to that. So I mean, I appreciate that. I would also like to know, as we all noted, that YoloTD does actually kind of have a little bit of skin in this game when I look here. So yes, and maybe no, all at the same time. Yes, Director Bernstein, are we good to move on?
Yep.
All right, perfect. Okay, next item is item 8, appoint alternate to Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority Board of Directors.
Just very quickly on this, we do appoint 3 seats to the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority, 2 regular seats and 1 alternate. Tom Stollard, City of Woodland, served as our alternate until recently, and so we do need to appoint a new alternate to that board, or in an ideal world, we would.
And then the only question I have, Director Bernstein, is how often do we actually have to do the appointing process?
With that, historically, we have only done it when there's a change in the composition of, in other words, the board members who were serving on that board were no longer serving on the YoloTD board. But that is just, since I've been here, we can do it as frequently as we want.
Okay, I'm not buying for anything. I'm just asking, wanting to make sure.
Yeah.
So currently, sitting in those seats, we have Director Fricks and we have Director Chapman, who are the primaries, right?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. So you guys also can't be the alternates. So just, yes, go ahead.
I think we should ask them if they want to stay in their position, and I think they do.
Thank you, Director Lauren. That's an excellent point. I will take it to you all. Do you all want to continue to be primaries? That's a great point.
Yeah, I'm happy to stay on the Capital Corridor Board. I think, there's a bunch of reasons why. Happy to talk about those, but yeah, I'm interested in staying on the board. So representing this agency on that board.
Yeah, same here.
All right, so I've got a yes that they're gonna, that they want to stay primary. Is there anyone that would like to either be the alternate or discuss why they would want to be the primary? I'm not one of them. I will be very clear. Okay, I got notes. Okay. So with that, I would nominate as an alternate Director Vega, since she's coming in for John.
Yeah. That's all.
Anyone, but no, in all seriousness, anyone willing to be, I can't even look at you guys because you're not even options. Anyone willing to be the alternate? Hard no for
I think that the primary responsibility
Thank
is
you.
Form 700. I mean, I'll just say, for the alternate
Okay.
primarily. I mean, you have to file your Form 700s, of course. I mean, Director Chapman and I are pretty consistent in terms of our attendance. The meetings are typically 4 to 5 times per year.
And Oakland
They
and,
rotate along this, they rotate, and occasionally in Sacramento as well too, it just rotates along that. But everyone has the ability to participate remotely as needed. A majority of the board has to be there in person, because it's a multi-county JPA, you just have to have a majority of the board in person, but many people, because it's a 16-member board, many people do participate remotely, so like on occasion, so. I would say we probably attend half the meetings in person and half the meetings remotely, so.
So I'll second Director Vega.
I will, happily come.
oh, I appreciate you. I really do. Thank you so much. So, I've got a first on Director Vega and I'm actually, Director Chapman had technically already seconded. All in favor? Oh, God, my bad. I will take public comment. Thank you. She's keeping me honest.
My farm mom does attend 100% of the meetings as well, too. so-
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually very true.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, public comment, here we go.
Yes, so let me give you my expertise on this. So the meetings in 2025 are either in Oakland at the BART Boardroom or in Sassoon City at the Solano Transportation Authority Board of Directors room along the waterfront near the train station in Sassoon City. The next meeting is Wednesday, February 19th at 10 a.m. and that will be in the BART Boardroom in Oakland. One of the biggest goals the board has and the staff has this year is reinstituting lost trips that had occurred at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a big equipment issue though, is whether their sister agency, the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority based in Stockton, overseen by the San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission, is going to get the new Siemens Venture cars that they all need to provide them the double-decker equipment back over to the Capital Corridor service. There was some Lone State equipment that went back to Southern California that is not in the pool in Northern California anymore. So that's has been a big challenge since the biggest part of the pandemic has been put behind us and they're trying to restore service. But yes, February 19th, 10 a.m., Oakland BART Boardroom. I go at 6 o'clock in the morning from Sacramento Valley Station to Jack London Square. It's a 2-hour trip. And then I come back and I write a meeting summary to interested stakeholders that I have on a list that need a meeting summary. And the best one to do it is when you come back from Oakland, because the trip from Sassoon is very short. Even in Sacramento, it's only 40 minutes. So I'd rather do it when I get home. But if it's from Oakland, I do it on the train. It's very productive, much better than driving. So yes, it's a very exciting board to be on. And Dr. Early, I can even assist you with any of the things that the corridor has, because you're in the city right in between two stations on the corridor that people have to get to West Sacramento from either city, Davis or Sacramento. So perhaps maybe some perspective I could assist you on if you wanted to serve on that board too, and I could bring you to the meeting in Oakland next month on the 19th.
I greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much, sir, for your public comment.
Thank you.
Any additional public comment? Okay, Mr. Hirsch?
Mike is a force of nature. What would we do without him? We decided to spend $465 million on the I-80 corridor widening. The Capital Corridor is the other service in that corridor. We're just as interested in that corridor, we should do both. There's been, as far as I know, there haven't been any reports to this board of what's happening, the ridership, the plans, the implementation and whatnot. And I think that's really important if we're going to take the global view with the transportation provider for the entire county. That's the corridor is really important. I think that's important. I think I haven't seen that. Hopefully that will be put on the future agenda item. And I'm quite concerned that basically there's been that the state rail plan which just came out is totally inconsistent with the Joint Powers Board plan, which, so there's really no plan to put up hourly service, because we don't have anywhere near the capital funds to do that, to make the upgrades to do that. Maybe I'm wrong, Lucas can maybe correct me on that, but I'm quite concerned, is that, because that corridor is so important, we're gonna spend almost $500 million on. We should be putting transit alternatives, and that's the most viable one in there. So, and I also note that that rail line is going to be underwater, possibly by the end of the century. We should be investing in that now to figure that out. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that little comment. All right, now I'm going to bring it back to my colleagues. Any additional questions or comments? All right, so we have a motion on the table for Director Vega to be alternate. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Thank you guys so much. Moving on to item 9, appointment to the Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority. Is this an annual one? And I asked only because the other ones, it sounds like, don't have a clock on them.
That's correct. This is the second time we made these appointments. The first time was last January, and at the time the board had requested this come back this year.
Okay,
But we could change that going forward.
so today we have, okay, so the representatives are myself.
Yes, but the representatives currently to the Carter Board are Director Early, Director Chapman, and the alternate is Director Warren.
Okay, perfect. I would like to continue serving on that board. I'm currently vice chair. We are still in the thick of, I think, some major work that needs to happen in order to stand Carter up. I'd also say, and potentially we don't do it today, but we might want to consider that not being an annual appointment, maybe every 2 years. So we may want to think about that, and I don't necessarily know if we can do that today. I'm looking at Kimberly.
Yeah, we can't, we don't
Is it- was
want it to change, but we can certainly go to take the direction and follow up with
Perfect.
that.
Okay, and then Director Chapman, do you want to continue to serve?
Yeah, I would, if there's other folks who are, that is amenable to my colleagues. As Director Early said, it's one that we've been, the past year, done a lot of work on, and we're kind of getting into our staffing model and a lot of the work that's happening to kind of stand that organization up, and would be happy to continue to serve on.
Thank you. Director Warren?
2 things. First, I would like to continue to be alternate on this one. Rather, is it just a clarifying question for Kimberly? In the last motion for adding Ms. Myra Vega
As
as alternate, did you also need in that motion to keep the board members on there? I just didn't know. if you
No,
did.
we just needed the
Okay,
alternate.
great. I was like, I don't know about that.
No, very good.
All right.
Okay, perfect.
So happy to move Directors Early and Chapman as the regular members and just Director Warren as alternate on the Cardiff board.
Perfect. Can I let a second? Yeah, I'm not supposed to.
You can.
Okay, perfect. I'm gonna second it. I know we have to take public comment, and I will do that, but we have a first and a second on the floor. Any more comments before I take public comment? Look at my left. Nope. Okay, public comment. Mr. Hirsch.
I, going to move discussions over. Equity is the big issue here with the Carter board, and I've again expressed my concern that basically there's not enough money after paying the VMT mitigation to deal with the equity issue. And I'm also quite concerned that basically that no one has addressed how easy it is to avoid tolls on these express lanes. Autumn and I share a hobby, we bicycle. You put a bicycle on the back of your car, they can't see your license plate. This is a big problem. You drive around looking at license plates, how many people have abused and taken the paint off their license plate? It's quite common. They estimate $500 million are lost to toll revenue every year in the United States because of those sorts of things. And there's almost no enforcement because nobody wants to do that. Or you put a wheelchair on the back of your car. And you can't go in. So is a ship officer gonna stop them from doing that? Put a car seat in the back, you can't tell whether someone's a third person in there. Shade your back windows. Can't tell if it's a third person there, someone just flips it. There's all sorts of ways of playing the game. And the tolls are gonna be $10 from Davis to Sacramento, $1 an hour. You were quoted on the paper saying would be the peak hour toll rates. That's gonna come revenue for equity, and I'm not sure there's even equity after we pay the mitigation, because the mitigation funds are so underfunded with the tolls revenue. So you have some heavy lifting in Carta, and I get, just like Capricorn, this, you made some decisions on the EIR, those Carta does on those issues should be reported back to the Yolo Transportation District, because you guys were accountable and made some tough decisions there. So that should be reported on a regular basis. Even just the minutes of those meetings should be included, just so the Capricorn minutes could be included in the packet every time. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hirsch. Any additional public comment? Oh, okay, yes, Director
I'd
Bernstein.
just like to make a point of clarification that I never publicly stated that the tolls would be $10 from Davis to Sacramento.
Thank you for that point of
There's a dollar
clarification.
mile, you said.
Okay, so thank you for that point of clarification. Any additional public comment in person? Seeing none, do I have any public comment online?
I see no hands.
Okay, I'm gonna bring it back now. I'm gonna close public comment, bring it back to our board. We have a motion that was on the floor. Director Barrett's put the motion in play. I seconded that motion. I will remind you, it is for myself and Director Chapman to continue to be on the board with Director Lauren as the alternate. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion passes. All right, we are moving now to item 10, administrative reports by Autumn Bernstein.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. So we did not have a transit representative here for us tonight, but I wanted to just share a couple quick things. First, we are on track for our service expansion of our Davis Express routes and our West Sacramento locals that's starting this Sunday, January 19th. I also wanted to commend the Transdev staff who were here just on Saturday, the 11th. There actually was a fire at the cannery right next door. One of the outbuildings is actually very close to our fence. This really posed a threat to our fleet and our facility. You know, our buses, we have a diesel fueling station and a compressed natural gas fueling station. And of course, each of our buses contains a lot of fuel and flammable materials. Our mechanic, in particular mechanic Eric Benitez, was on it literally with a fire extinguisher stationed across the fence, putting out embers as they came. I got here a few minutes after the fire was out and saw him covered with soot out by our buses, basically protecting our facility and our fleet. And so I just wanted to give him a shout out for going above and beyond to protect our public transit fleet and facility. That concludes our report for Transdev. I want to note a couple other things. Tuesday, January 28th, we are holding an outreach event for our Woodland Transit Center at 2nd and Court in downtown Woodland. From 7:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. We are going to have four buses and a Beeline vehicle station at that site to show kind of like as a pop-up demonstration of what a transit center would look like at that site. And that event is being co-sponsored by the City of Woodland and the Woodland Chamber of Commerce. We are also launching a survey as well to get feedback from downtown businesses and residents as well as Yolo bus riders. So stay tuned for more, but just wanted to let everybody know about that upcoming event. We hope to see some of you there. And then this Thursday, wanted to give you all a heads up. The SACOG board is having a discussion about transit funding. I'll be there to participate in that conversation. One of the things that we'll be talking about is the MOU that governs actually how federal 5307 funding is allocated in the Sacramento region. That's an agreement that's about 10 years old. And there are some conversations happening about potentially updating that funding agreement. So wanted to share that and look forward to seeing some of you there at the SACOG board meeting this Thursday. And then lastly, wanted to share that the Citizens Advisory Committee had its first meeting of the year last Monday, where they talked about, they also had the Transit 101, Transit Planning 101 presentation that Lola gave them as well. And we also caught them up on the Woodland Transit Center and got some of their feedback on the options that are before you, which we will bring back to you when we talk about that with the board next month. That concludes my report.
All right, perfect. Are there any questions for Director Bernstein on her report?
Can I make?
Yes, Director Chapman.
3 quick things. One, can you send out an invite to the event in Woodland, all that, so we get on our calendars?
Absolutely.
Awesome. 2, can you send out or kind of a summary or what you're looking for us around STIP funding? Can you send us an email like what you're requesting of us over the next month or so to take back to our staff?
Will do.
Okay, and then 3rd, Brian, can I get the recipe for the funding soup that you referred to earlier? I'm not sure what goes in that. I would like to get your recipe so we can talk offline, just between you and me. No one else gets the funding soup recipe. All right, so I got that.
You get to see.
I want the secret
Thanks,
recipe.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, Director, Director Harris, yes, go ahead.
Really quickly, so first of all, just thank you, Matt Dulcich.
Yes, thank you.
Many years. It's been a total pleasure serving with you, and we, I think, have sat next to each other this entire time, so, you know, you have to be careful what happens down this end. No, really, really grateful for your service, as local government relations director for the university, but also, just the work that you've been doing. You've done it for a long, long time in the community, but also just, especially, you know, I think not all local government relations directors have a background in transit and transportation planning, and that has been such an asset to this agency. And so we're really grateful for that and your perspective and your engagement for all those years. So thank you so much.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I know you're not going anywhere, really. I mean, you're just not attending these meetings on a regular basis. So really grateful you're still staying in the community, of course, too, in the region. Just, can we recognize our amazing employee at the next meeting? Can like, we have that employee come in and we just like do some kind of YTD resolution or something? I mean, like if literally stop helping fight the fire and stopping, you know, yeah, all that, just, I think we should do that. That's pretty awesome. So anyway, they seem like they're worthy of recognition. And then just lastly, if we could just, if folks would be willing to entertain just a brief moment of just observation or silence for all what's going on in Southern California, our friends and family and fellow Californians, and the sort of destruction that's happened down there. I just think it'd be good to just think for a second and focus our attention and energy towards them all. Much appreciate that.
Of course. Okay, Director, I'm gonna end with you because I'm expecting a speech. So I wanna, that's exactly, I wanna turn to my colleague.
Were we gonna talk about the long range calendar?
Yeah, that is.
Perfect, but not yet.
Okay.
Yes. Did anyone else want to say anything? I know, Director, Dulcich, how long have you served on our board?
Interesting question. I was just checking. I think my first board meeting was October of 2015.
Wow.
Whoa.
Nearly 10 years.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay. So it's been a decade. It's not even like 10 years. Like you have like one word that describes the number of
Flew
years.
by, yeah.
Did anyone else want to say anything? I mean, I will, but I want to make sure.
I just want to say thank you, obviously, but you are such a statesman. It's so nice to work with you. Even when we've had really difficult issues, you've just been so kind and professional. And I carry, that with me, that, as an aspiration. So thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you.
Director Chapman?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And I would echo much of what Director Warren said. I think I oftentimes found myself in this conversation thinking, God, I wish I had thought of that. And I think that like you have this calm, kind of balanced approach to your thoughtfulness in the way that you bring it forward. And I've always looked forward to when these pieces come up. We're up here, we're talking, and we're all talking, and then I kind of turn to you and as Director Warren to kind of a statesman who just kind of brings things back into perspective. And I really appreciate your attention to detail and what you've brought to these conversations. You'll be missed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Director Vega? I know you just came here today. Well, let's give you space.
Thank you.
I will say, and then we'll hand it over to you, Matt, but I too have appreciated serving with you. I won't repeat all the things my colleagues have said, but they are all correct, and I feel exactly the same way. You're very thoughtful. I love how you are often data informed as well as research informed. That is, those are the things that are near and dear to my heart personally. And so thank you so much for sort of being our constant North Star is what I would say there. And so would love to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you for those kind words, maybe overly kind. So I hope you're not trying to speed my departure. I've had a wonderful time serving here, and I continued in this role after switching my job, and did so really just because I felt this is such a great board to work with. And the work was so important. I wanted to get through the Causeway Connection, not the Causeway Connection, the Managed Lanes project. and then look for the right time to do a handoff. And with Kelly Rivas, it is a perfect time. We were just talking about timing and a perfect person to switch out with. So you are in good hands. I am still around. I think I'm going to stay on as the alternate. So once a year, you might see me here. And I'm also very bold on transit. I think right now it is such a great opportunity, a great time to be able to know how to pay for a new bus service. Like if you're a rider in a new city, you can easily find the information to how to pay. You can easily find the information for the route. And I think transit has a great future. And I think this district is really set up to be a big part of that future. So thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right, so I think we are now going to long break. Did you want to say something before I? Okay. Not quite yet, because we're gonna go long range calendar. We're gonna do the whole thing and then we'll do public comment on it. Long range calendar.
Great, I think we've got a slide that we can throw up there for that. But, oh, I apologize, this slide was not updated, and that is me. I forgot to update this slide today. So we can go ahead and look at the one that's in your packet. On the second to last page, or excuse me, the very last page. We've got a busy couple months coming up, as I mentioned earlier. Some highlights coming up next month. We're going to be opening the public comment period for our winters and nights landing for exchange for Beeline. We're also going to be talking about service to Sutter Health Park for the River Cats and A's 2025 baseball season. We'll have some financial updates, and then we'll be talking, we'll have what we believe will be an informational update for you on the Woodland Transit Center, sharing the results of the public event that we're happening and potentially some of the preliminary analysis that we're doing of the various options for the AHSC application. And then also YATSE, our countywide active transportation plan, will be asking for your direction and feedback as we go to the next stage of that project. So very busy agenda next month. And then in March, closing the 30-day public comment period for the Beeline service change and asking for your approval for that. And then hopefully an action to approve an MOU for the Woodland Transit Center for the AHSC application for Yolo Donnelly, which will be due in April. And then in addition, that month, we're going to be bringing you the findings of the analysis we've done for potentially serving the Fourth and Hope facility out on East Beamer and looking at potential options for that. And then if I can convince him, we're going to postpone a short range transit plan update from March to May. That's something Barney and I have been talking about, but right, we currently have that on the agenda for March as well, which is a lot. And then so that's the one we're looking at potentially trying to postpone. And then of course that leaves April for our first special budget workshop on TV and funding.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm looking at my colleagues. Any questions?
Not really a question. I will not be available at February meeting, and Mayor Al Biasio will be there having great representation of the city of Winters. And I guess I can't say anything about the item except that we did speak earlier about outreach to Winters, and there will be some robust outreach. It'll be on the ad. It'll be in paper. There's an email and a phone number for people to call. So I'm hoping that we get some robust information from the community.
Any other questions or comments? I have just one then regarding the staging, the experience, the events. I don't know what we're calling it. I think it's called staging. That will happen in Woodland. In addition to, I 100% agree with Director Chapman. You're now a doctor, for the invite. Could you also, I would ask, send it to City Council in Woodland. And I say that because one of the things we heard last meeting was that the City Council hadn't quite seen potentially all of them outside of our director that's represented for Woodland here. And so that would, I think, be helpful.
We actually haven't started publicizing this event yet. We're developing all the materials. So we're announcing it here tonight because we won't see you again before then, but absolutely. We have an extensive amount of outreach efforts planned to publicize the event.
The only thing I need is just something to put on my calendar.
Absolutely.
So I would just like to
That will
press
happen tomorrow.
That is it for me. Okay, with that being said, unless there's something else, I'm gonna open it up to public comment for this. All right, public comment open. Who would like to go first? Perfect, Mr. Hirsch.
Thank you for serving, Matt. As you know, Lucy Davis is a bus service with a university around it. Thank you for that. We need to publicize the outreach on the Woodland Transit Service on the buses and also in Davis, because Davis riders go to the airport. We need to get into the community. I haven't heard any updates on this $465 million project. How long will the construction last? My neighbors would like to know. And what about the second level of funding? We have a Caltrans reps here. Certainly, you can have the Caltrans rep give us a report on the updates and what's going on with the project and the construction and the transit alternatives around the construction. It's kind of scary sometimes out there. It'd be nice to have an update on that and some accountability. Us giving some feedback to Caltrans about making that causeway and that freeway as safe as possible. The long range calendar. When I first joined, coming here, there was no long range calendar. That's one of the things that Autumn brought to the board. One innovation you might put on the long range calendar document is a parking lot. Things you haven't dated yet, but you know you will do in the future. So that might be an addition to up the game a little bit. We're always trying to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Right, any additional public comment? All right, Frank?
Thank you. Very much looking forward to the services update for Sutter Health Park with the A's and the River Cats playing at the ballpark together and combined over at least the next 3 years. That in addition, just to reiterate what Executive Director Bernstein said, and it was on the Yolo Transportation District Facebook page, as well as the Yolo Transportation District website, that yes, on Sunday the 19th, so it's Sunday of a 3-day holiday weekend, that the trips in West Sacramento will be reinstituted back into the schedule, in addition to the Davis Express trips, which would operate on the Monday through Friday schedule. Let me piggyback on that and just mention, and this is kind of historical context in nature. Monday the 20th is a holiday, Dr. Martin Luther King Day. Yolo Transportation District offices historically have been closed on that date, but the service operates what's known as a weekday non-express day. That's not necessarily true for everyone in the region. So if you're connecting to any other of the transit providers in the SACOG region, please check with them first to figure out what schedule they are going to be operating on Monday, January 20th. Last, I want to say thank you also for putting in the long range calendar the Woodland Transit Center updates coming back in February and March, as well as mentioning before the next meeting the event. I think you said on the 28th. What intersection is that at again? I heard you say morning hours.
Yes, please.
Second and Court.
Second and Court. Okay, starting at 7:30 till about lunchtime. Okay, I'll go home, put that in my calendar to I have that morning free because that's a Tuesday, and Tuesday currently on my work schedule is my Saturday. So yeah, Monday nights are my Friday nights. All right, thank you again.
Right, thank you so much. All right, with that, I'm gonna bring it back. If there are not any additional, nope, there's not, I'm looking, we are adjourned. Yeah. Well,